I never imagined that the night I wore my finest gown would become the night I lost everything. The ballroom of Hartwick Manor glittered with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across silk and jewels, and I stood at its edge like a shadow that had wandered too far into the sun. I was not meant to be there, not really. Governesses do not attend society balls. We exist in the spaces between worlds, neither servant nor family, neither invisible nor truly seen. But Lady Hartwick had insisted, her voice bright with what I mistook for kindness. "Come, Miss Ashford," she had said, smiling behind her fan. "You have worked so hard with the children. One evening of music and dancing will do you good." It had seemed, in that moment, like an unexpected gift. I should have known better. The aristocracy does not bestow gifts without collecting debts. I had borrowed a dress from the lady's maid, a pale blue silk that whispered against the floor as I moved. My dark hair was pinned with care, though no jewels adorned my throat or fingers. I looked almost respectable, almost as if I belonged. That was the first mistake. The second was believing that respectability could be borrowed as easily as a gown. The evening began innocently enough. I kept to the edges of the room, watching the dancers swirl past in their elaborate choreography of wealth and privilege. The gentlemen in their black evening coats, the ladies in their gowns of emerald and ruby and gold. I recognized many of them, had seen them visiting the manor, had curtsied and lowered my eyes as they passed. Now I stood among them, and the difference in our stations had never felt more absolute. Lady Catherine Pemberton was the first to approach me. She glided across the parquet floor with the predatory grace of a woman who has never known want, her diamond necklace catching the light with every breath. I knew her by reputation. She was cousin to an earl, wife to a baron, and mistress of the most vicious tongue in 3 counties. "Miss Ashford," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to turn heads. "How unexpected to see you here. I thought you were occupied with your duties." There was something sharp beneath her smile, something that made my skin prickle with warning. "Lady Hartwick was kind enough to invite me," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I have been teaching her children for nearly 2 years now. How devoted you are." Lady Catherine's eyes traveled over me with the thoroughness of an assessment. "And how fortunate the children are to have such constant attention. Tell me, do you never take leave? Do you never visit your own family?" The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Other women drew closer, their fans fluttering, their eyes bright with curiosity. I felt the weight of their scrutiny, the way they catalogued every detail of my appearance, my posture, my response. "My family is in the north," I said carefully. "The distance makes frequent visits impractical. How lonely that must be." Another woman joined the circle, Lady Harriet Ashworth, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "To be so far from home, so isolated. Why, you must feel quite untethered from proper society." "I have my work," I said. "It provides purpose. Purpose." Lady Catherine repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "Yes, I suppose it must. Though one wonders what other purposes might occupy a young woman so entirely removed from the watchful eye of family and community." The insinuation hung in the air between us, poisonous and deliberate. I felt my cheeks flush, but I held my ground. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart had begun to race. These women were circling, and I could not yet see the shape of their attack. The musicians struck up a waltz, and the conversation shifted as couples moved toward the dance floor. I thought perhaps I had been spared, that the moment had passed. I began to retreat toward the refreshment table, seeking the safety of occupation. But Lady Catherine's voice followed me. "Miss Ashford, one more thing." She was at my elbow now, her perfume heavy and cloying. "There have been certain rumors. Nothing substantial, you understand, merely idle talk. But in my position, I feel it my duty to address such matters directly." My throat tightened. Rumors. Indeed. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper that nonetheless carried to the women gathered around us. It has been suggested that during your time in Lady Hartwick's employ, you have been observed making frequent trips to the village, alone, at odd hours, and that you have been seen visiting a cottage on the edge of the estate, a cottage that was thought to be unoccupied. I visit the village for supplies, I said. Books for the children, materials for their lessons. Of course. Her smile widened. And the cottage? I hesitated. The truth was complicated. Bound by promises I could not break, but my silence gave her exactly what she wanted. You see, she said, turning to address the growing audience, she does not deny it. The visits are real, and there are those who claim to have heard, quite distinctly, the sound of a child crying from within those walls, a child that is not accounted for among Lady Hartwick's household. The room seemed to contract around me. I felt the eyes of every person within hearing distance fix upon me with sudden, ravenous interest. The music continued, but the dancing had slowed. People were watching now, waiting. That is absurd, I managed, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Is it? Lady Harriet stepped forward, her expression one of theatrical concern. Miss Ashford, if there is a child, if you have found yourself in unfortunate circumstances, the Christian thing would be to confess it. Hiding such a situation only compounds the sin. There is no situation, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. I have done nothing wrong. Then explain the child. Lady Catherine's words were sharp now, cutting through my protests. Explain the cottage, the secrecy, the whispers among the servants that you have been caring for an infant in that hidden place. Explain why a governess, unmarried and without family nearby, would undertake such a responsibility unless the child were her own. The accusation struck me like a physical blow. Around us, the whispers began, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. I saw faces I recognized, families whose children I had taught, whose homes I had visited in my professional capacity. Now they looked at me as if I were something contaminated, something shameful. This is a lie, I said, but my voice shook. I am being slandered. Then bring forth the truth. Lady Catherine's voice rang out clearly now, and I realized with sick certainty that this had been planned. Every word, every insinuation had been calculated to lead to this moment. Produce the child and its parentage, Miss Ashford. Let us see this innocent explanation you claim exists. I cannot, I whispered. The words felt like betrayal, but the promise I had made was not mine to break. You cannot, or you will not. She turned to the assembled crowd, her arms spread in a gesture of helpless appeal. You see how she protects her secret. What innocent woman would refuse such a simple request? The murmurs grew louder. I saw Lady Hartwick across the room, her face pale, her husband's hand on her arm holding her back. She had been kind to me once, but she would not risk her own reputation to defend mine. No one would. Disgraceful, someone muttered. To think she was teaching our children. What sort of example does such a woman set? The words washed over me, each one a small cut. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak in my own defense. The truth was locked behind a promise made in desperation, a vow to protect something more important than my own dignity. I had sworn to keep the secret, and even now, with my reputation crumbling around me, I could not break that oath. Lady Catherine moved closer, her triumph evident in every line of her body. Let this be a lesson, she said, addressing the room. We must be vigilant in whom we allow into our homes, into the lives of our innocent children. Respectability is not a garment one can simply put on for an evening. It must be earned through virtue and maintained through truth. I wanted to run. I wanted to vanish from that ballroom, from that world, from the weight of all those judging eyes. But my legs would not obey. I stood there, trembling, as the women around me drew back, as if my very presence might contaminate them. Then, cutting through the noise and the whispers, a voice spoke from the entrance to the ballroom, a voice that carried authority and command, that silenced the room as effectively as a thunderclap. That is quite enough. Every head turned. The crowd parted like a curtain drawing back, and through the gap walked a man I had seen only once before, and then only from a distance. The Duke of Thornfield. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in impeccable evening attire, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. His face was carved in stern lines, his eyes the color of winter storms. He moved with the absolute confidence of a man who had never questioned his right to occupy any space he chose. The room held its breath. Even Lady Catherine seemed momentarily at a loss, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The Duke walked directly toward me, his gaze never leaving my face. The crowd fell back before him, creating a path. I could not move, could not think. I knew who he was, everyone did. He was one of the most powerful men in England, a man whose word could make or break fortunes, whose favor was sought by politicians and princes alike. He was also notoriously private, having withdrawn from society years ago after some tragedy I had never learned the details of. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle despite its depth. "I believe I owe you an apology. This situation is entirely my fault." I stared at him, uncomprehending. He was close enough now that I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set with determination and something else, something that looked almost like regret. "You see," he continued, turning to address the assembled crowd, "Miss Ashford has been in my employ for the past year. The child these ladies speak of so freely is not hers. He is mine." The words fell into the silence like stones into a well. I heard someone gasp, heard the rustle of fabric as people leaned toward one another to whisper. But the Duke's voice cut through it all. "My son," he said clearly, "the child of my late wife, the Duchess of Thornfield, who died bringing him into this world. I hired Miss Ashford to care for him in privacy, away from the prying eyes of society, away from the gossip and speculation that would have made his early years a spectacle. She has served my family with discretion, with dedication, and with a level of self-sacrifice that none of you in this room could begin to comprehend." He took a step toward Lady Catherine, who had gone quite pale. She allowed her own reputation to be questioned and destroyed rather than break the confidence I placed in her. She endured your accusations and your cruelty in silence because I asked her to protect my son's privacy. "And you," he said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, "you used her silence as a weapon. You manufactured scandal from whole cloth and malice." Lady Catherine's fan trembled in her hand. "Your Grace, I had no idea. I only thought to protect." "To protect what? Your own entertainment? Your position as the arbiter of other people's worth?" The Duke's contempt was palpable. "You thought to destroy a woman of virtue because it pleased you to do so, because you could. Well, madam, consider this. As of this moment, anyone who continues to spread lies about Miss Ashford will answer to me personally. I will not be kind. I will not be forgiving. I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure that the damage you have attempted here tonight falls back upon your own heads." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable and absolute. I saw faces drain of color, saw fans rise to hide expressions of shock and fear. The Duke of Thornfield was not a man to make idle promises. He turned back to me, and his expression softened fractionally. "Miss Ashford, I apologize for placing you in this position. I thought I was protecting my son by keeping his existence private. I did not anticipate that my actions would expose you to such treatment. The failure is mine, not yours." I could not speak. My throat was tight with emotion, with relief and confusion, and something else I could not name. He was standing so close that I could see the weariness in his eyes, the lines that grief and responsibility had carved into his face. "Come," he said quietly, offering his arm. "Let me escort you from this place. You have endured enough for one evening." I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his coat. The crowd parted before us as we walked toward the exit, their whispers following us like the rustling of leaves. But the whispers were different now, uncertain and fearful, rather than gleeful and cruel. At the doorway, the Duke paused and looked back at the assembled guests. "One more thing," he said. "Miss Ashford will be continuing in my employ as governess to my son. Furthermore, I am extending an invitation for her to reside at Thornfield Hall as a permanent member of my household, with all the respect and protection that position entails. Anyone who questions her character or her past will be questioning mine. I trust I have made myself clear." He did not wait for a response. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the golden ballroom and its glittering cruelty behind. A carriage waited in the drive, the Thornfield crest emblazoned on its door. The Duke handed me inside with careful courtesy, then climbed in after me. As the carriage began to move, I finally found my voice. "Your Grace," I whispered, "why did you do that? You could have let me simply disappear. Your son's secret would have remained safe." He was silent for a long moment, his face half in shadow. When he spoke, his voice was weary. "Because I have spent 2 years hiding from the world, Miss Ashford. Hiding from my grief, from my responsibilities, from anything that might remind me of all I lost when my wife died. I hired you to care for my son so that I would not have to face him. Face the truth that he exists and she does not. I thought I was protecting him. But tonight, watching you stand there alone, watching you take the weight of my secrets onto your own shoulders, I realized what a coward I have been." He turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the carriage, his eyes were filled with a pain so raw it took my breath away. "You have been caring for my child with devotion while I have barely been able to enter the same room as him. You have sacrificed your reputation, your peace, your future prospects, all to honor a promise you made to a man who has been too lost in his own sorrow to see what he was asking of you. That ends tonight. I will not hide any more, Miss Ashford, and I will not allow you to suffer for my failures." The carriage rattled on through the darkness, carrying us away from the manor and toward Thornfield Hall. Toward the child who waited there, the little boy I had come to love as if he were my own. Toward a future I had never imagined and could not yet see the shape of. But as I sat across from the Duke in that swaying carriage, his confession hanging in the air between us, I understood that something had shifted. The secret was revealed. The hiding was over. And whatever came next, we would face it together, bound now not by silence and shadows, but by truth spoken aloud in a room full of enemies who had become, in that moment, far less dangerous than the lies we had been living. Thornfield Hall rose before us like a sleeping giant, its stone facade silvered by moonlight, its windows dark except for a few scattered lights in the upper floors. I had lived in the cottage on the estate grounds for a year, tending to the Duke's son, but I had never entered the main house itself. It had always seemed like a fortress, impenetrable and remote, much like the man who owned it. The carriage came to a stop beneath the portico, and a footman appeared to open the door. The Duke descended first, then turned to offer me his hand. His touch was brief and formal, but I felt the warmth of it through my glove, a reminder that he was real, that the events of the evening had truly happened, and were not some fever dream conjured by exhaustion and fear. Inside, the entrance hall stretched upward into shadow, the candlelight from a massive chandelier barely touching the corners of the vast space. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Thornfield ancestors looking down with expressions ranging from stern disapproval to mild curiosity. I felt their painted eyes following me as the Duke led me deeper into the house. Mrs. Graves, the housekeeper, emerged from a side corridor, her keys jingling at her waist. She was a woman of middle years, handsome in a severe way, with iron-gray hair and a posture that suggested military discipline. She looked from the Duke to me, her eyebrows rising fractionally. "Your Grace," she said, inclining her head, "we did not expect you to return this evening." "Plans changed," the Duke replied. "Mrs. Graves, this is Miss Elena Ashford. She has been caring for my son this past year. She will be taking up residence here in the main house from this night forward. Please prepare the blue room in the east wing and ensure that Miss Ashford has everything she requires. Mrs. Graves studied me with an expression I could not quite read. "Very good, Your Grace. Shall I bring tea to the drawing room?" "Thank you, but no." The Duke's voice was tired. "It has been a long evening. I will show Miss Ashford to her quarters myself." The housekeeper's surprise was evident, though she masked it quickly. "As you wish, Your Grace." She turned to me with a small, formal nod. "Welcome to Thornfield Hall, Miss Ashford." After she departed, the Duke stood for a moment in the center of the hall, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the stairs that curved upward into darkness. I wondered what he was thinking, what memories this house held for him, what ghosts walked these corridors. "Come," he said finally, "let me show you where my son sleeps. I assume you will want to look in on him." We climbed the stairs in silence, our footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The upper floor was quieter, more intimate, with paintings of landscapes and still lifes replacing the stern ancestors below. The Duke led me down a corridor to the left, stopping before a door painted white with gold trim. He opened it carefully, and warm light spilled out. Inside, a nursery had been arranged with obvious care. A cradle stood near the fireplace, where embers glowed softly. Shelves lined one wall, filled with toys and books. A rocking chair sat by the window, and in it, dozing lightly, was Mrs. Pemberton, the nurse I had been working with at the cottage. She stirred as we entered, her eyes opening with a start. "Your Grace," she whispered, rising quickly. "Miss Ashford. I did not expect you." "How is he?" I asked, moving toward the cradle. Inside, wrapped in soft blankets, the baby slept peacefully. Thomas. He was 14 months old now, with dark curls like his father, and a face that was beginning to lose its infant roundness. I reached down to touch his cheek gently, reassuring myself that he was well. "He is fine," Mrs. Pemberton said. "He woke once for feeding, but settled again quickly." She looked between the Duke and me, clearly confused by our presence together, by the change in arrangements. "Miss Ashford will be residing here at the hall from now on," the Duke said. "You may return to the cottage if you wish, or I can arrange other accommodations for you. Your service has been invaluable, Mrs. Pemberton, but the situation has changed." The older woman nodded slowly. "I understand, Your Grace. I will make arrangements in the morning." She gathered her shawl and basket, curtsied to both of us, and departed, leaving the Duke and me alone with his sleeping son. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The Duke stood near the door, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the cradle. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the way he held himself rigid as if preparing for battle. "You may go to him," I said softly. "He is your son. I know who he is." The words came out harsh, almost defensive. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. "Forgive me. That was unkind." I said nothing, waiting. In my year of caring for Thomas, the Duke had visited perhaps a dozen times, and each visit had been brief, strained, marked by a palpable discomfort that the baby seemed to sense. He would stand at a distance, ask after the child's health, and depart as quickly as propriety allowed. I had thought him cold, unfeeling. Now, watching him in the dim nursery light, I began to understand that what I had mistaken for indifference was actually a wound so deep he could barely touch it without bleeding. "He looks like her," the Duke said finally. His voice was rough. "My wife. The same curve to his mouth, the same way his nose wrinkles when he sleeps. Sometimes I see her so clearly in his face that I cannot breathe." He moved closer to the cradle, each step seeming to cost him something. When he reached it, He stood looking down at his son with an expression of such naked grief that I had to turn away, feeling as though I were intruding on something too private, too raw. "She wanted him so badly," he continued, and I realized he was speaking more to himself than to me. "We tried for years. We had nearly given up hope. And then, finally, she was with child. She was so happy, Miss Ashford. She glowed with it. She talked to him constantly, sang to him, made plans for his future. She had names chosen, rooms designed, a whole life imagined." He reached down, his hand hovering over the baby's head but not quite touching, and then she died, bringing him into the world. She bled, and there was nothing the physicians could do, nothing I could do. I held her hand and watched the light leave her eyes, and the last thing she said to me was, "Take care of our son. Promise me you will love him." His hand dropped to his side. I promised. But I did not tell her that every time I looked at him, I would see her dying. I did not tell her that I would fail her so completely. "You have not failed," I said, my voice firm despite the emotion threatening to choke me. "Thomas is healthy and loved. He is safe and cared for, by you, not by me." The Duke turned to face me fully, and in the firelight I could see moisture gleaming in his eyes. "I hired you because I could not bear to be near him. I told myself it was for his protection, for his privacy, but the truth is, I was protecting myself. I was hiding from the guilt of surviving when she did not, from the anger that he lived and she died, from the terrible, shameful resentment that sometimes rises in me when I see him smile." "That is grief," I said gently, "not failure. Grief takes many forms, Your Grace. It does not make you a monster to feel what you feel. Does it not?" He laughed bitterly. "What kind of father resents his own child? The kind who loved his wife beyond measure. The kind who is still drowning in loss." I moved closer to him, careful not to intrude on his space, but wanting him to see that I was not judging him, not condemning. "Grief is not rational, Your Grace. It does not follow rules or timelines. You are allowed to feel what you feel, but you are also allowed to heal, to move forward, to build a relationship with your son that honors your wife's memory without being imprisoned by it." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore so constantly. "You speak from experience," he said. It was not a question. I nodded. My mother died when I was 12. My father remarried within the year. I hated him for it, hated her, hated everyone who seemed to move on so easily while I was still bleeding. It took me years to understand that his remarriage was not about forgetting my mother, but about surviving his grief in the only way he knew how. "We all find our own paths through loss, Your Grace. Yours has been isolation and distance, but perhaps it is time to try a different path." Thomas stirred in his sleep, making a small sound of contentment. We both looked down at him, this tiny creature who carried the weight of so much love and so much pain. "Will you help me?" the Duke asked quietly. "Will you teach me how to be his father?" The question surprised me with its vulnerability, its honesty. This was not the cold, distant Duke of reputation. This was a man stripped bare by grief and guilt, reaching for a lifeline. "I will help you," I said. "But you must understand, Your Grace, that there is no teaching required. You already are his father. You need only allow yourself to act on it." He nodded slowly, then, with visible effort, reached down and placed his hand gently on Thomas's back. The baby shifted slightly under the touch, sighing in his sleep. The Duke's breath caught, and for a moment I thought he might withdraw. But he held steady, his large hand spanning the child's small back, feeling the rise and fall of breath, the living proof of his son's existence. We stood like that for several minutes, the three of us in the quiet nursery, while the fire burned low and the night deepened around Thornfield Hall. It was not a grand gesture, not a dramatic reconciliation. It was simply a man touching his son, perhaps for the first time, with intention rather than obligation. But in that small moment, I felt something shift, like the first crack in ice that has held a river frozen through winter. Finally, the Duke withdrew his hand and stepped back. "You must be exhausted," he said, his voice more controlled now, more like the aristocrat he was trained to be. "Let me show you to your room. We can discuss the new arrangements in the morning." He led me from the nursery and down another corridor to the east wing. The blue room was lovely, larger than any I had ever occupied, with walls papered in a soft azure pattern and furniture of dark wood that gleamed in the candlelight. A fire had been laid in the grate, and my few belongings from the cottage had already been brought up and arranged with care. "Mrs. Graves is efficient," the Duke said with the ghost of a smile. "I will leave you to rest. Tomorrow we will need to address the fallout from this evening's revelations. I expect there will be callers, letters, perhaps reporters. My solicitor will need to be consulted. It will be complicated." "I am prepared for complications," I said. "I have grown quite familiar with them. So I have observed." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Ashford, there is something I must say. What I did tonight at the ball was necessary, but it was also selfish. By claiming you publicly as part of my household, by associating your reputation so directly with mine, I have bound you to Thornfield in ways that may limit your future choices. If you had wished to marry, for instance, or to seek other employment, those options may now be more difficult. I did not consult you before making that decision, and I apologize for the presumption." I considered his words carefully. "Your Grace," I said finally, "my reputation was already destroyed. You did not create that situation. You rescued me from it. Whatever limitations may come from my association with Thornfield, they are preferable to the complete social annihilation I was facing. You have given me back my dignity and my livelihood. I am grateful." He nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was not entirely satisfied with my answer. "We will speak more tomorrow," he said. "Good night, Miss Ashford. Good night, Your Grace." After he left, I moved to the window and looked out over the dark grounds. Somewhere out there was the cottage where I had spent the last year, my small world of books and baby clothes and quiet routines. That life was over now. I was part of the great house, drawn into the orbit of the Duke's complicated grief and his slowly awakening love for his son. I thought about the women at the ball, their cruel words and crueler intentions. Part of me wanted to hate them, to savor the memory of their shocked faces when the Duke revealed the truth. But mostly I felt a weary sort of pity. They had tried to destroy me because it entertained them, because they had nothing better to do with their privilege and their power. They would go home to their comfortable houses and their comfortable lives, and they would find new targets for their malice. I had simply been convenient, but I had also been saved, and not just from social ruin. Standing in that nursery, watching the Duke struggle to touch his own son, I had felt something awaken in me that I had thought long buried, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival, a belief that perhaps in this strange household bound by grief and secrets, there was something worth building, something worth fighting for. I undressed slowly, hanging the borrowed silk gown in the wardrobe. Tomorrow I would need to arrange for proper clothing, for all the things that came with this new position. But tonight, I simply wanted to sleep, to let the exhaustion of the evening wash over me and carry me into dreams. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the house settle around me, I thought of Thomas sleeping peacefully in his nursery. I thought of the Duke, alone in whatever chambers he occupied, wrestling with his demons. And I thought of the promise I had made to help him find his way back to his son. It would not be easy. Grief rarely releases its hold without a fight. But I had seen the crack in his armor, had watched him place his hand on his son's back with something like hope flickering in his eyes. It was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning is all you need. The morning came gray and cold, with rain tapping against the windows and fog shrouding the grounds. I woke to find a maid building up the fire and laying out a simple morning dress that fit me surprisingly well. "Your measurements were sent ahead, miss," she explained when I questioned her. "His Grace wanted you to have everything you needed." I dressed and made my way to the nursery, where I found Thomas awake and cheerful, playing with wooden blocks under Mrs. Pemberton's supervision. The nurse looked tired, as if she had not slept well, but she smiled when she saw me. "He has been asking for you," she said. "Well, in his way. He kept pointing to the door and making that sound he makes when he wants something." I knelt beside the baby and he immediately reached for me, his face lighting up with recognition. My heart squeezed with affection. "Good morning, little one," I said softly, gathering him into my arms. "Did you sleep well?" He babbled something incomprehensible and patted my cheek with his small hand. Mrs. Pemberton watched us with a mixture of fondness and resignation. "You have been good for him," she said. "He has thrived under your care. I hope the changes ahead will not disrupt that too much." I looked up at her, understanding the unspoken question. "Mrs. Pemberton," I said carefully, "I hope you know how much I value your assistance. The Duke spoke of new arrangements, but that does not mean your role is ended. If you are willing, I would very much like you to continue helping with Thomas's care." Relief crossed her face. "I would like that, miss. I have grown attached to the little lord. It would be hard to leave him." The day unfolded with a strange mixture of routine and novelty. I tended to Thomas as always, but now in the grand nursery of Thornfield Hall rather than the cozy cottage. Servants came and went, bringing meals, stoking fires, carrying messages. It was clear that the household was adjusting to the new situation, trying to understand what my presence meant for the established order of things. At noon, a footman arrived with a request from the Duke. "His Grace asks if you would join him for luncheon in the small dining room, miss." I left Thomas with Mrs. Pemberton and followed the footman through the maze of corridors. The small dining room was still far grander than anywhere I had eaten before, with paintings of hunting scenes and a table that could seat 20. The Duke stood when I entered, gesturing to a chair near his own. "Thank you for coming," he said, as servants brought in dishes of soup, bread, cold meats, and cheese. "I thought we should discuss our situation frankly, without the barriers of formality that usually govern such conversations." I seated myself, hyper-aware of the servants moving around us. The Duke seemed to notice my hesitation. "They are discreet," he said, "and what I have to say is not secret. Indeed, most of it will become public knowledge soon enough." He waited until we were served, and the servants had withdrawn before continuing. "I have already received 3 letters this morning," he said. "One from Lady Hartwick, apologizing profusely and begging me not to withdraw my patronage from her family. One from Lady Catherine Pemberton, also apologizing, though with considerably less sincerity. And one from my solicitor, informing me that news of last night's events is already spreading through society and that I should expect significant attention in the coming days." I felt my stomach tighten. What sort of attention? Curiosity, mostly. Society loves a scandal, and we have provided them with several. A hidden heir revealed, a duke emerging from seclusion, a governess rescued from ruin. They will want to see us, to judge for themselves whether we are villains or heroes, or simply interesting diversions from their usual entertainments. "And which are we?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "That depends on who is telling the story. But I think we can shape the narrative to some degree, which is why I wanted to speak with you about expectations going forward." He set down his spoon and looked at me directly. "Miss Ashford, you are now a member of my household in a very visible way. That means you will be subject to scrutiny, both from society and from my own circle of acquaintances. Your behavior, your appearance, your associations, all will reflect on Thornfield and on my son. I do not say this to frighten you, but to ensure you understand the reality of your position." "I understand," I said quietly. "Furthermore," he continued, there will be those who question the nature of our relationship. A young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as a widowed duke, caring for his child. There will be speculation, perhaps unkind speculation. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to protect you from such talk, but I cannot prevent it entirely. I met his gaze steadily. I have already been accused of far worse, Your Grace. Speculation about my relationship with you seems almost tame in comparison, perhaps, but it is important that we maintain absolute propriety in our interactions, not because I doubt your character or my own, but because perception matters in our world. Thomas needs stability, protection. He needs his future to be secure. We cannot afford to give society any ammunition to use against him. I nodded. What would you have me do? Continue as you have been, caring for Thomas with the devotion you have shown this past year, but also begin to take a more visible role in the household. Dine with me when appropriate, so that the servants and any visitors can see that our relationship is professional and proper. Accompany me and Thomas on walks around the grounds, establishing yourselves as part of the family structure. And when the time comes, attend social functions with me as Thomas's governess, so that society can see that you are respectable and respected. The thought of facing society again made my chest tighten with anxiety, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I can do that, I said. Good. The Duke's expression softened slightly. I know I am asking a great deal. You have already endured much on account of my family, but I believe that if we present a united front, if we show society that Thornfield is a household of honor and integrity, we can overcome the gossip and speculation. Thomas deserves that much. We finished the meal in more comfortable silence, and afterward, the Duke accompanied me back to the nursery. It was the first time he had voluntarily sought out his son's company without being summoned by necessity, and I saw Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows rise in surprise when we entered together. Thomas was on a blanket on the floor, surrounded by toys. When he saw his father, he looked up with curious eyes, then returned to his serious work of stacking blocks. The Duke stood uncertainly at the edge of the blanket, and I recognized the same paralysis I had seen the night before. Gently, I moved to sit beside Thomas, patting the floor next to me in invitation. The Duke lowered himself to the ground with the awkwardness of a man unaccustomed to such casual postures. For a moment, all three of us simply sat there, an odd tableau of uncertainty and hope. Then Thomas, with the fearless curiosity of a child, crawled toward his father and offered him a wooden horse. The Duke took it with the care one might use handling priceless crystal. Thomas, he said softly, and the boy looked up at the sound of his name. His small hand reached out and patted the Duke's knee, a gesture of innocent acceptance that made my throat tight. We spent the rest of the afternoon like that, the three of us on the nursery floor, building towers of blocks and rolling balls and making the simple, silly sounds that delight small children. The Duke was stiff at first, uncertain, but gradually I saw him begin to relax. He laughed when Thomas knocked over a carefully built tower. He caught the baby when he stumbled, preventing a tumble. And when Thomas grew tired and fussy, the Duke did not flee but stayed, watching as I rocked the child and sang him to sleep. After Thomas was settled in his cradle for his afternoon nap, the Duke and I stepped out into the corridor. He looked exhausted, but also somehow lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying had shifted slightly. The following weeks brought a transformation to Thornfield Hall that was both subtle and profound. The house that had felt like a mausoleum when I first arrived began to stir with life, as if awakening from a long and troubled sleep. The Duke, true to his word, spent time with Thomas each day, his visits growing longer and more confident as he learned the rhythms of his son's world. I watched him discover the joy in small things, the way Thomas's laugh could light up a room, the fierce concentration on the baby's face when he attempted something new, the trusting weight of a child falling asleep in his father's arms. but the outside world did not allow us to retreat into this private healing. As the Duke had predicted, society's interest in our situation was insatiable. Letters arrived daily, some offering congratulations on the Duke's emergence from mourning, others fishing for information about the mysterious Governess and the hidden heir. Calling cards piled up in the entrance hall, visitors hoping to be received to see for themselves the transformed household of Thornfield. The Duke handled most of these intrusions with practiced diplomacy, receiving a select few visitors and sending polite refusals to the rest. But he was careful to include me in the acceptable callers, establishing my presence as natural and unremarkable. I learned to sit in the drawing room with my needlework, to offer tea with steady hands, to meet curious gazes with calm dignity. It was exhausting in ways I had not anticipated, this constant performance of respectability, but I understood its necessity. 3 weeks after the ball, a letter arrived that changed everything. The Duke brought it to me in the morning room, where I was reviewing lesson plans for Thomas's early education. His expression was troubled, a deep line carved between his brows. "This is from the Dowager Duchess of Ashford," he said, handing me the thick cream envelope with its elaborate seal. "My late wife's mother. She has heard about Thomas and wishes to visit." I looked up at him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. "You have not told her about him before now?" He shook his head. Catherine and her mother were not close. The Dowager is a formidable woman, Miss Ashford, rigid in her views and unforgiving of what she perceives as weakness or impropriety. When Catherine died, the Dowager blamed me for not protecting her, for allowing her to become with child in the first place. She said things that were, he paused, searching for the right words, difficult to forgive. We have not spoken since the funeral, and now she wants to meet her grandson. She wants to judge whether I am fit to raise him. The Duke's voice was bitter. She makes that quite clear in her letter. She questions my decision to keep Thomas hidden, to hire an unknown governess, to live in what she terms unnatural seclusion. She suggests that perhaps Thomas would be better served by her direct involvement in his upbringing. Fear clutched at my chest. Could she take him? Does she have that authority? Not legally, no. But she has influence, connections, the ability to make life very difficult if she chooses. And more than that, he added quietly, she is Catherine's mother. She has a right to know her grandson, regardless of how I feel about her personally. When does she wish to visit? He looked down at the letter. She arrives tomorrow. She did not ask permission, merely informed me of her plans. That is typical of the Dowager. She has never believed in asking when she can simply command. I spent that evening preparing the nursery with extra care, making sure everything was perfect, that Thomas's clothes were immaculate, that the rooms reflected a household of order and love. Mrs. Pemberton sensed my anxiety and tried to reassure me. The boy is healthy and happy, miss. Anyone can see that. No grandmother could find fault with how he has been cared for. But I was not comforted. I had heard the stories of the Dowager Duchess, a woman who had ruled her own household with an iron will, who had arranged her daughter's marriage to the Duke as a strategic alliance between two great families. She represented everything about the aristocracy that intimidated me, the absolute certainty of their own rightness, the power to shape lives according to their preferences. The Duke was equally tense, pacing the library that evening when I brought Thomas down for his customary visit. The baby, sensing the strained atmosphere, was fussy and difficult to settle. I walked him around the room, bouncing him gently, singing softly, while the Duke stood at the window, watching the twilight gather over the grounds. "What if she is right?" he said suddenly. "What if I have done everything wrong? Keeping him hidden, hiring you without proper references, allowing him to grow up away from his family, his heritage. Your Grace," I said firmly, "Thomas is thriving. He is loved and safe. That is what matters. Is it?" He turned to face me, and I saw genuine anguish in his expression. I look at him and I see my son, my child, and I am learning to love him as he deserves. But tomorrow, the dowager will look at him and see the heir to a dukedom, a chess piece in the grand game of aristocratic succession. She will see all the ways he needs to be shaped and molded to fit that role. And perhaps she is right. Perhaps I am being selfish, keeping him here in this quiet world when he should be learning what it means to be a Thornfield. Thomas began to cry in earnest, picking up on the emotional turbulence in the room. I held him close, rocking him, making soothing sounds. The Duke watched us with an expression I could not read. "He needs you," the Duke said softly. "Look how he turns to you for comfort. You are the only mother he has known." The words struck me with unexpected force. "I am his governess," I said carefully, "not his mother." "Are you not?" The Duke moved closer, his gaze intense. "You feed him, clothe him, comfort him when he cries, teach him his first words, celebrate his small triumphs. What is that if not motherhood?" I did not know how to answer. The boundaries of my role had become blurred over the months, my professional distance eroded by genuine love for the child in my arms. But to claim motherhood seemed presumptuous, a stepping beyond my place. "Tomorrow," the Duke said, "we present ourselves as a household. You, me, and Thomas. Whatever the dowager thinks or says, that is the reality she will have to accept. We are his family now." The Dowager Duchess arrived precisely at noon in a carriage that made even the Dukes seem modest. She was a tall woman, ramrod straight despite her 60 years, dressed in black silk that rustled with authority. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, with the same strong features I had seen in the portrait of the late Duchess that hung in the gallery. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, missed nothing as she swept into the entrance hall. "Thornfield," she said, offering her hand to the Duke with the air of one conferring a great favor. "You look well. Seclusion appears to have agreed with you." "Madam," the Duke replied, bowing over her hand with perfect courtesy. "Welcome to Thornfield Hall. May I present Miss Elena Ashford, my son's governess." Those sharp eyes turned to me, assessing every detail of my appearance, my posture, my reaction to her scrutiny. "So you are the mysterious governess who has caused such talk. How old are you, Miss Ashford?" 24, Your Grace. Quite young. And your qualifications?" I hesitated, but the Duke answered for me. "Miss Ashford came with excellent references and has proven herself admirably capable. Thomas is healthy, happy, and developing exactly as he should. I will be the judge of that." The dowager's voice was crisp. "Where is my grandson?" "He is in the nursery," I said. "Shall I bring him down?" "No. I will go to him. A child should be seen in his natural environment. Lead the way, Miss Ashford." I glanced at the Duke, who gave a small nod. We climbed the stairs together, the dowager's rustling skirts filling the silence. In the nursery, Thomas was playing on his blanket, building towers with wooden blocks under Mrs. Pemberton's watchful eye. When he saw us enter, he looked up with his customary curiosity, then went back to his construction. The dowager stopped in the doorway, her hand gripping the frame. For a long moment, she simply stared at the child, her face an unreadable mask. Then she moved forward slowly, as if approaching something precious and fragile. "He has Catherine's eyes," she whispered, "and her hair. Oh, he looks so like her." She knelt beside the blanket with surprising grace, and Thomas, always friendly, offered her one of his blocks. The dowager took it with trembling hands, and I saw tears glittering in those sharp eyes. "Hello, little one," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I am your grandmother. I knew your mother. She would have loved you so very much." Thomas patted her hand with baby gentleness, and the dowager made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She stayed there on the floor with him for several minutes, letting him show her his toys, listening to his babbling with the intensity of someone trying to hear an echo of a lost voice. Finally, she rose and turned to face us. Her expression had hardened again, the vulnerability locked away behind aristocratic composure. "He is well cared for," she said. "I can see that clearly. But this situation cannot continue as it is." The Duke's expression shuddered. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Thomas is not simply your son, Thornfield. He is the heir to one of the oldest titles in England. He has responsibilities, expectations, a position in society that must be carefully cultivated from childhood. He cannot be raised in isolation by a young governess, however competent she may be." "Miss Ashford has done nothing to merit your disapproval," the Duke said, his voice cold. "I do not disapprove of Miss Ashford." The Dowager looked at me with something that might have been grudging respect. "From what I have observed, she has done an admirable job under difficult circumstances. But she is one woman, Thornfield. Thomas needs more. He needs proper tutors, proper introduction to society, proper understanding of his heritage and duties. He is 14 months old," the Duke said flatly. "He needs love and stability, not lessons in aristocratic protocol. Love and stability, yes, but also preparation for the life he will lead. You cannot shelter him forever from the reality of who he is." The Dowager moved toward the window, looking out over the grounds. Catherine and I had our differences, but she understood duty. She knew what it meant to be born into privilege and responsibility. She would want Thomas to be raised with that same understanding. "Do not presume to tell me what Catherine would have wanted," the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You did not approve of our marriage. You thought I was too withdrawn, too scholarly, not political enough for your ambitious plans. You wanted her to marry a man who would use her connections to advance himself in court. Well, she married me instead, and she was happy. We were happy. Until she died giving me a son I could barely look at because the sight of him broke my heart." The Dowager turned, and for the first time I saw genuine pain in her face. "You think you are the only one who lost her? You think you are the only one who grieved? She was my daughter, Thornfield, my child. I carried her, raised her, watched her grow into a woman of grace and intelligence. And then I lost her because she wanted what all women are told they should want, a child of her own. You blame yourself for her death, but I blame myself for not warning her, for not telling her that motherhood is not the gentle blessing society pretends it is. It is dangerous and brutal, and it takes more women than anyone wishes to acknowledge." Her voice had risen, sharp with old grief and anger. "But Thomas is here," she continued more quietly. "He survived when she did not, and I will not let my guilt or your grief prevent him from having every advantage, every opportunity that is his birthright. Catherine would not forgive either of us if we failed him that way." The Duke stared at her, and I saw the surprise in his face, the realization that her criticism came not from judgment, but from shared loss. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "I am proposing that I involve myself in Thomas's upbringing. Not to replace you or Miss Ashford, but to supplement what you provide. I can ensure he has the best tutors as he grows, that he is properly introduced to the families who will shape his future, that he understands the responsibilities that come with his title. I can give him what Catherine would have given him, had she lived. And in return, you stop hiding. You bring Thomas into society gradually, appropriately. You show the world that Thornfield is not a house of secrets and shame, but a proper ducal household raising the next generation with care and honor. And you," she added, looking at me, "you continue your excellent work, Miss Ashford, but you do so openly, as a valued member of this household rather than a hidden employee." I felt the weight of her gaze, the assessment behind it. She was offering a kind of approval, I realized, but also a challenge. She was testing whether I had the strength to withstand the scrutiny that would come with a more public role. The Duke looked at me, a question in his eyes. It was my choice to make, I understood. I could refuse, could retreat back to the comfortable shadows of the cottage, or I could step forward into the light, with all the risks and challenges that entailed. "I accept," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If it serves Thomas's best interests, then I accept. The Dowager nodded, something like satisfaction crossing her face. Good. Then we are agreed. I will return next month for a longer visit, and we will begin making proper arrangements. In the meantime, she moved back to Thomas, who had been watching us with solemn eyes. Continue as you have been. The boy is happy, and that matters more than any of us like to admit. She bent and kissed Thomas's forehead gently. Then she swept from the room, leaving the Duke and me standing in her wake. That went better than I expected, the Duke said after a moment. Did it? I felt shaken by the encounter, by the intensity of the Dowager's grief and determination. She approves of you. Coming from the Dowager, that is high praise indeed. He moved to stand beside me, watching Thomas return to his blocks, as if the adult drama had been nothing more than background noise. She is right about one thing, though. We cannot hide forever. Thomas deserves more than a sequestered childhood. He deserves love, I said firmly. Everything else is secondary. Is it? The Duke's voice was thoughtful. I used to believe that. I thought love was the only thing that mattered, that it could overcome any obstacle, any challenge. But Catherine loved me and Thomas, and it was not enough to keep her alive. Love is essential, Miss Ashford, but it is not sufficient. We must also be practical, strategic, willing to engage with the world as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. I looked up at him, seeing the weariness in his face, the weight of responsibility he carried. You are afraid, I said softly. Of course I am afraid. He met my gaze directly. I am afraid of failing him the way I failed his mother. I am afraid of the Dowager's interference, of society's judgment, of all the ways this fragile peace we have built could shatter. And I am afraid, he added quietly, of what happens when Thomas no longer needs you, when he grows beyond the nursery and into the wider world. Why would that frighten you? Because you have become essential, Miss Ashford, not just to Thomas, but to this household, to me. The admission seemed to cost him something. When I watch you with my son, when I see the way you love him without reservation or calculation, I remember what it is to feel hope. You have given me that gift, and I do not know what I would do if it were taken away. His words hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I was not ready to examine. The Duke seemed to realize he had said too much, had crossed some invisible boundary that should have remained intact. Forgive me, he said, stepping back. That was inappropriate. I am your employer, nothing more, and I should not burden you with my personal anxieties. You are not burdening me, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to my own ears. We are both navigating unfamiliar territory, Your Grace. It is natural that we would rely on each other for support. He nodded, but something had shifted between us, a recognition of feelings that were dangerous to acknowledge. We stood there in the nursery, with Thomas playing peacefully nearby, both of us aware that the simple dynamic of employer and employee had become something far more complicated. The weeks that followed were busy with preparations for the Dowager's return visit. She sent detailed instructions about the changes she expected, the improvements that should be made to the nursery, the schedule she wished Thomas to follow. The Duke grumbled about her interference, but complied with most of her requests, recognizing the wisdom in her guidance even when it chafed against his own preferences. I found myself increasingly included in the household's social activities. The Duke began inviting me to join him for dinner several times a week, conversations that ranged from Thomas's development to literature, politics, and philosophy. He was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions that challenged my own and made me reconsider assumptions I had held without question. I looked forward to these evenings more than I cared to admit, the way his face would animate when discussing something that interested him, the rare smile that transformed his usually stern features. But I was also aware of the danger in growing too comfortable, too close. The servants noticed our increasing familiarity, and though they said nothing directly, I caught the speculative glances, the knowing looks exchanged when the Duke laughed at something I said. Mrs. Graves, in particular, seemed to watch us with maternal concern, as if worried we were heading toward trouble neither of us could see. One evening, about a month after the Dowager's visit, the Duke asked me to join him in the library after Thomas was asleep. I found him standing by the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand, staring into the flames with the same troubled expression I had seen so often in our early days together. "Is something wrong?" I asked, closing the door behind me. He turned to face me, and I saw exhaustion in every line of his body. "I received a letter today from Lord Ashworth. He is proposing a match between his daughter, Lady Harriet, and myself. He suggests that Thomas needs a mother, that I need a wife, and that such an alliance would be beneficial to both families. Lady Harriet. I remembered her from the ball, one of the women who had participated in my humiliation. My stomach twisted with something I did not want to name. What did you tell him? I have not responded yet." The Duke set down his glass and moved closer to me. "Miss Ashford, I need to be honest with you about something. These past months, working with you to care for Thomas, spending time in your company, I have come to realize that my feelings toward you have evolved beyond simple professional respect. Your Grace," I whispered, alarm and something else flooding through me. "Please, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I am not declaring anything inappropriate. I am simply acknowledging a truth that I think you have also felt. We have grown close, perhaps too close for the rigid boundaries that should exist between us. And now I must decide whether to pursue a socially acceptable marriage to a woman I do not love, or to continue on this path with you, knowing that society will never accept what we might become to each other." I felt as though the floor had tilted beneath me. "You cannot be suggesting what I think you are suggesting." "I am not suggesting anything," he said firmly. "I am simply being honest about the situation we find ourselves in. If I marry Lady Harriet or someone like her, it will be for Thomas's sake, to give him the stable, conventional household that society expects. But it will be a lie, Miss Ashford. I will stand before God and promise to love a woman I feel nothing for, while the person I have actually come to care for continues to live under my roof, caring for my child, a constant reminder of what I have sacrificed for propriety." "This is impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "You are a duke. I am a governess. Whatever you think you feel, it cannot lead anywhere that would not destroy us both." "I know that." His voice was heavy with resignation. "Believe me, I know. Which is why I have not acted on these feelings, why I maintain proper distance even when every instinct urges me to do otherwise. But I needed you to know, needed to be honest, before I make decisions that will affect both our futures." I turned away from him, my hands gripping the back of a chair for support. This past year, caring for Thomas, building a life here at Thornfield, I had been so careful not to allow myself to hope for anything beyond my prescribed role. But now, with his words hanging in the air between us, I could no longer deny what I had been feeling, the way my heart lifted when he entered a room, the happiness I found in our conversations, the dreams I had begun to have about a future that could never be. "What would you have me do?" I asked quietly. "I would have you tell me honestly what you feel, so that I can make my decision with full knowledge of what I am choosing or rejecting." I took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I care for you," I said, still not turning to face him. "I care for you far more than is wise or appropriate, but I also care for Thomas and for the future he deserves. If marrying Lady Harriet or someone like her would give him the stable, respectable household he needs, then that is what you must do. My feelings and yours are secondary to his well-being." "Are they?" The Duke's voice was closer now. He had moved toward me, though he still kept a respectful distance. "Or is that what we tell ourselves to avoid fighting for what we actually want?" "Fighting for what we want would be selfish," I said. "We are not the only ones whose futures hang in the balance." "No," he agreed. We are not. Which is why I will likely accept Lord Ashworth's proposal and marry his daughter. It is the practical choice, the responsible choice. But I wanted you to know, before I do, that it is not what my heart desires. The admission hung between us, precious and painful. I finally turned to face him, seeing the same conflict in his eyes that I felt in my own heart. If things were different, I said softly, if the world were not what it is, if circumstances allowed for choices based on feeling rather than duty, then perhaps we might have had a chance at happiness. But they are not different, Your Grace. The world is exactly what it is, and we must live in it as we find it. He nodded slowly. You are wiser than I am, Miss Ashford, and braver. Very well. I will respond to Lord Ashworth in the morning, accepting his proposal in principle. The formal arrangements will take time, but, he paused, his voice dropping, it will happen eventually. And I will continue as Thomas's governess, I said firmly, for as long as you need me. That will not change, regardless of who becomes your wife. I am counting on that, he said quietly. Thomas needs you. And so, he added even more quietly, do I. We stood there in the firelit library, the space between us charged with everything we could not say, everything we could not allow ourselves to feel. Then, with visible effort, the Duke stepped back, restoring the proper distance between employer and employee. The announcement of the Duke's engagement to Lady Harriet Ashworth appeared in the London papers 3 weeks later, accompanied by effusive praise for the match and speculation about the upcoming nuptials. I read the notice alone in the morning room, the newspaper trembling in my hands, forcing myself to breathe through the sharp pain that lanced through my chest. This was what I had told him to do. This was the right choice, the responsible choice. That it felt like a betrayal was my own weakness, my own foolishness for allowing hope to take root where it had no business growing. The household prepared for change with the efficiency of long practice. Wedding arrangements were discussed, guest lists compiled, renovations planned for the Duchess's suite that had stood empty since Catherine's death. The Duke moved through it all with mechanical precision, making decisions without emotion, signing documents without comment. I watched him withdraw into himself again, becoming the cold, distant figure I had first encountered, and I mourned the loss of the man who had learned to laugh with his son, who had spent evenings debating philosophy with me by the library fire. Lady Harriet visited frequently during the engagement, inspecting the house that would become her domain, offering suggestions for improvements with the confidence of one who had never been refused anything. She was beautiful in the way society valued, with golden hair and porcelain skin, accomplished in all the arts expected of a duchess. She played the pianoforte brilliantly, spoke French and Italian fluently, could discourse on literature and current affairs with practiced ease. She was everything I was not, everything the Duke needed in a wife, and she hated me on sight. Oh, she was too well-bred to show it openly, too conscious of propriety to make scenes or accusations. But I felt it in the way her eyes followed me when I moved through a room, in the slight curl of her lip when she observed me with Thomas, in the pointed questions about my background and qualifications. She knew, I realized with growing dread. Perhaps not the specific feelings the Duke and I harbored, but she sensed the connection between us, recognized it as a threat to her position. Miss Ashford, she said one afternoon, finding me in the nursery where Thomas was napping. We should discuss the arrangements for after the wedding. I set down the book I had been reading and stood. Of course, Lady Harriet. How may I be of service? She moved around the room with the air of someone cataloging property, touching furniture, examining toys. I have been giving considerable thought to Thomas's care. He is at an age now where he would benefit from more structured education, more rigorous oversight. He is 18 months old, I said carefully. His education consists primarily of learning to speak and walk steadily, precisely. And those are tasks that do not require a governess of your, she paused delicately, limited experience. I believe it would be more appropriate to hire a proper nanny, someone older and more established, who could work in conjunction with tutors I will select. My heart began to pound, but I kept my voice level. Those are decisions for the Duke to make, surely. The Duke, she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes, will be my husband. His household will become our household, and I take my responsibilities as Duchess very seriously. Thomas needs a mother, Miss Ashford, not a governess playing at the role. When I marry the Duke, I intend to be that mother. Your services, while appreciated, will no longer be required. The words landed like blows. I had known this possibility existed, had tried to prepare myself for it, but hearing it stated so baldly still stole my breath. Does the Duke know of your intentions? I managed. Not yet. I wish to speak with you first, woman to woman. She moved closer, her voice dropping to something more intimate and infinitely more cruel. I know you fancy yourself important here, Miss Ashford. I have seen how you look at him, how you position yourself as indispensable. But let me be perfectly clear. You are staff. You are replaceable. And once I am the Duchess of Thornfield, you will be replaced. I will not leave Thomas, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed emotion. You will, if I require it. Unless, of course, you wish to create difficulties that would reflect poorly on you and damage any future employment prospects you might have. I can be very generous to those who cooperate, Miss Ashford. I can provide excellent references, letters of introduction to other families. But I can also be quite thorough in destroying reputations when crossed. Ask Lady Catherine how that works out. The threat was unmistakable. I stood frozen, understanding fully now the position I occupied. I had no power here, no security beyond the Duke's goodwill, and once he married Lady Harriet, his goodwill would be subject to his wife's preferences. He would choose her over me as he should, as duty demanded. Thomas would lose the person he had known as mother, but children were resilient. He would adapt, learn to love his new stepmother, and I would become a dimly remembered figure from his early years. Lady Harriet smiled, satisfied with my silence. I am glad we understand each other. You need not leave immediately, of course. The wedding is still 2 months away. But do begin making arrangements, securing another position. I will provide that reference I mentioned, presuming you cause no difficulties. She swept from the room, leaving me trembling with rage and grief and helplessness. I wanted to fight, to refuse, to demand my right to stay with the child I loved. But I had no rights. That was the brutal truth of my position. I was hired help, easily dismissed, legally powerless. That evening, the Duke summoned me to the library. I went with dread coiling in my stomach, knowing what was coming, preparing myself to maintain dignity in the face of dismissal. But when I entered, I found him standing by the window in the twilight, his shoulders slumped with weariness, and the first words from his mouth were not what I expected. I cannot do this, he said without turning. I cannot marry her. I closed the door carefully. Your Grace, we have discussed this. Lady Harriet is an excellent match. Lady Harriet is a viper. He turned to face me, and I saw anguish in his expression. She came to me this afternoon with her plans for Thomas's care, plans that involve dismissing you and replacing you with staff of her choosing. She spoke of restructuring the household, of ensuring proper distance between the Duke and his employees, of all the changes she intends to implement once she has authority to do so. She is entitled to run her household as she sees fit, I said quietly. By removing the one person my son loves and trusts, by treating you as if you were expendable furniture? He moved toward me, his voice rising. I agreed to this engagement because I thought it was right for Thomas. But if the cost is losing you, then the price is too high. You cannot break the engagement over a governess, I said, trying to inject reason into a situation spinning out of control. The scandal would be enormous. It would damage Thomas's prospects, your reputation, everything we have worked to protect. Then tell me what to do, he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. Tell me how to marry a woman I do not love, to watch you leave, to give Thomas into the care of someone who sees him as an obligation rather than a child to be cherished. Tell me how to live that life, Miss Ashford, because I cannot see the way forward. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You give Lady Harriet time. You help her understand Thomas, to see him as you have learned to see him. You trust that love can grow between them as it grew between you and your son. And you let me go, knowing that Thomas will be cared for and that I will find another position, another family to serve. And what about what I feel for you? The words burst from him as if he could no longer contain them. What about the fact that I wake each morning hoping to see you at breakfast, that I spend my days looking for excuses to seek your company, that when I am with you, I feel alive in a way I have not since Catherine died? What do I do with that, Miss Ashford? You bury it, I said, tears pricking my eyes. You bury it, as I am burying what I feel for you, and you do your duty, and you pray that someday the pain will lessen. That is not enough. It has to be enough. There is no other choice available to us. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him struggling with himself, with desire and duty warring in his expression. Then, slowly, he nodded. You are right. Of course. You are always right. He turned away, his voice going flat. I will speak with Lady Harriet, try to convince her to keep you on. Perhaps if I make it a condition of the marriage. She will resent it, I said, and she will make both our lives miserable until she finds a way to be rid of me regardless. It is better if I simply go quietly. Where will you go? I do not know yet, but I will find something. I always have. The resignation in my voice seemed to break something in him. He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and took my hands in his, a breach of propriety so profound that I gasped. Come with me, he said urgently. We will leave tonight, now. Take Thomas and go somewhere they cannot find us. France, Italy, America, it does not matter. We will start over, the 3 of us, away from all of this. Your Grace, I whispered, shocked by the wildness in his eyes. You cannot abandon your title, your responsibilities, your life. That is madness. Is it madness to want happiness? To choose love over duty for once in my damned life? It is madness to destroy everything you have built on an impulse. I pulled my hands from his, though it cost me dearly. You are not thinking clearly. You are overwhelmed and exhausted, and you are making this more complicated than it needs to be. Then simplify it for me. His voice was harsh now, challenging. Tell me you feel nothing, that you could walk away from Thomas and from me without a second thought. Tell me I am alone in this torment. I cannot tell you that, I said, my voice breaking. But I can tell you that feelings do not change reality. I can tell you that running away solves nothing. And I can tell you that if you truly care for Thomas, you will give him the stable, respectable life he deserves, even if it costs us both everything. The silence stretched between us, heavy with all the things we could not say, could not allow ourselves to feel. Finally, the Duke stepped back, his face settling into the cold mask I knew so well. Very well, he said. I will honor the engagement. I will marry Lady Harriet as planned. And you, he paused, his voice catching slightly, you will stay until the wedding. I will not have Thomas lose you before he must. It was a small concession, but I took it gratefully. Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me for doing the minimum, for failing you in every way that matters. His bitterness was like acid. Leave me now, Miss Ashford. I need to be alone. I left him there in the gathering darkness, and I did not allow myself to cry until I reached my own room, where I buried my face in my pillow and sobbed for the life I would never have, for the love I could never claim, for the child I would soon lose. The weeks that followed were a kind of torture, watching the wedding preparations accelerate while Thomas grew and changed and became more precious to me with each passing day. He was walking now, toddling around the nursery with determined concentration, babbling words that were almost coherent. Mama, he would say sometimes, reaching for me. And each time the word pierced my heart because I knew I would not hear it for much longer. Lady Harriet's visits became more frequent and more pointed. She brought samples of nursery fabrics for my opinion, then dismissed my suggestions with barely concealed scorn. She interviewed nannies in my presence, making clear that my judgment was neither wanted nor valued. She began spending time with Thomas, holding him awkwardly, reading to him with mechanical precision, trying to win his affection through persistence rather than genuine warmth. Thomas tolerated her, but did not warm to her. He would sit through her visits with solemn patience, then escape to my arms the moment she left, clinging with the fierce possessiveness of a child who sensed change coming. The Duke watched all of this with growing distress, but said nothing, bound by the engagement he had committed to, trapped by the social machinery he had set in motion. We barely spoke anymore except when necessary, maintaining careful distance, both of us counting down to the wedding date with a mixture of dread and resignation. 3 weeks before the wedding, the Dowager Duchess returned for another visit. She swept into Thornfield with her usual authority, demanding updates on the wedding preparations, the guest list, the arrangements for Thomas's care. But she was perceptive, and within hours she had sensed the tension permeating the household. She summoned me to her sitting room on her second day at Thornfield. I went with trepidation, knowing her ability to extract information, her intolerance for evasion. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a chair opposite her own. "Tell me what is happening in this household. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. Do not play games with me, Miss Ashford. I am too old and too experienced to be fooled by pretty manners. There is an atmosphere in this house that speaks of unhappiness barely contained. The Duke looks like a man walking to his execution. You look as if you have not slept in weeks, and that insipid girl he is meant to marry treats you with the kind of disdain that suggests she sees you as a rival. So I ask again, what is happening?" I swallowed hard, trying to find words that would not betray the Duke or myself. Lady Harriet wishes to make changes to the household after the wedding. She prefers to select her own staff, which is her right as the new Duchess. She wants you gone. It was not a question. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "And the Duke?" "The Duke is doing his duty. That is not what I asked." The Dowager leaned forward, her sharp eyes boring into mine. "What does the Duke want, Miss Ashford? I cannot speak to His Grace's desires, cannot or will not." She sat back, studying me with the intensity of a naturalist examining a specimen. "You love him." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to deny it, to protect us both, but the Dowager's expression told me she would accept nothing less than truth. "My feelings are irrelevant," I said finally. "The Duke is engaged to Lady Harriet. He will marry her in 3 weeks. What I feel or do not feel changes nothing." "Everything you just said is true," the Dowager agreed, "and yet you did not deny it." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, what do you know of my daughter's marriage to the Duke?" "Only that they were happy together." "They were. But happiness did not come immediately." The Dowager's gaze grew distant, remembering. "I arranged the marriage, you see, as was my duty and my right. Catherine was 18, the Duke was 25. They barely knew each other. The wedding was magnificent, the alliance beneficial to both families, and they were both utterly miserable for the first year." I stared at her, surprised by this revelation. Catherine came to me 6 months after the wedding, in tears, saying she had made a terrible mistake, that she and the Duke were completely incompatible, that she would never be happy. I told her what every mother tells her daughter in such circumstances: give it time, do your duty, learn to love him. And she did, eventually. They grew to care for each other deeply, to build a genuine partnership. But that first year was hell for them both. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to understand what you would be condemning the Duke to if this wedding proceeds." She leaned forward again, her voice intense. "He does not love Lady Harriet. He will not grow to love Lady Harriet. She is shallow and spiteful and entirely focused on the social advantages the marriage brings her. Catherine grew to love the Duke because she had the capacity for depth, for seeing beyond surface attractions to the man beneath. Lady Harriet has no such capacity. Then why did you approve the match? I did not approve it. I was informed of it after the arrangements were already made. The Duke did not consult me, though he should have. And now I am watching him make the same mistake I made with Catherine, choosing duty over desire and hoping it will work out. But this time, there is no guarantee of happiness, only certainty of misery. What would you have me do? Tell him the truth. Tell him what you feel. Give him a reason to break this engagement before it is too late. I cannot ask him to sacrifice his reputation, Thomas's future, everything he has built, for my sake. Not for your sake, the Dowager said sharply. For his own. For Thomas's. That child needs a mother who loves him and a father who is not destroying himself from the inside out with regret and resentment. He needs a household built on genuine affection, not social obligation. Lady Harriet is the appropriate choice, I insisted. She is everything a duchess should be. And you are everything a mother should be, everything a wife should be. The Dowager stood, moving to the window. Society has rules, Miss Ashford, and I have lived by them my entire life. I forced my daughter into a marriage that eventually brought happiness, but I will not stand by and watch the Duke force himself into one that will bring only misery. Sometimes the scandal of breaking an engagement is preferable to the tragedy of a loveless marriage. What about Thomas? I asked. What about the damage to his prospects, his future? Thomas will weather whatever storms come. Children are resilient, but he cannot weather being raised by a stepmother who resents his existence and a father who has given up on joy. That, Miss Ashford, will do lasting damage. She turned to face me fully. I am going to speak with the Duke. I am going to give him my opinion, which he can accept or reject as he chooses. But I wanted to speak with you first, to understand the full situation. And now I do. She swept from the room, leaving me trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. What had I done? What had I revealed? And what would the consequences be? I did not see the Duke for the rest of that day or the next. He was closeted with the Dowager, having conversations I was not privy to, making decisions I could only imagine. Lady Harriet arrived on the third day, summoned by urgent message, and was shown immediately to the Duke's study. I heard raised voices, angry accusations, but could not make out words. 2 hours later, Lady Harriet emerged, her face flushed with fury, her movements sharp with rage. She swept past me without a word, climbed into her carriage, and departed Thornfield in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. The Duke appeared in the entrance hall moments later, looking exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He saw me standing on the stairs and held out his hand. "Come," he said simply. I descended and took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. He led me to the library, where the Dowager sat by the fire with Thomas on her lap, entertaining him with a story told in dramatic voices that made the baby laugh. "The engagement is broken," the Duke said without preamble. "Lady Harriet and I have agreed that we are not suited for each other. She is furious. Her father will likely never speak to me again, and society will have a field day with the scandal. But I do not care." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. The Dowager looked up from Thomas with a satisfied expression, as if she had orchestrated precisely this outcome. "You broke the engagement," I whispered. "Your Grace, the consequences will be severe." "I am aware," he said calmly. "I have already sent letters to my solicitor, to Lord Ashworth, to several key members of society explaining my decision. Lady Harriet has been generous enough to claim the break was mutual, though I suspect that generosity will last only as long as her pride allows. By tomorrow, all of London will know that the Duke of Thornfield has jilted his betrothed." "But why?" I asked. though my heart was already pounding with hope I did not dare acknowledge. What changed? The dowager cleared her throat. I may have reminded my dear son-in-law that he is not obligated to repeat the mistakes of the past. I told him that Catherine would have wanted him to be happy, that she would have understood choosing love over convention. I also told him that if he married that dreadful Ashworth girl, I would make his life even more unpleasant than she would, which is saying something. Thomas chose that moment to escape from the dowager's lap and toddle over to me, arms outstretched. I scooped him up automatically, holding him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. He patted my face with his small hands, then pointed at the Duke. "Papa," he said clearly, and my breath caught because it was the first time he had spoken that word with such certainty, such recognition. The Duke moved closer, his eyes shining with emotion. "Yes, Thomas," he said softly. "Papa is here. And so is," he looked at me, his expression vulnerable and hopeful, "so is the woman we both love." I could not speak past the lump in my throat. The dowager rose gracefully from her chair and moved toward the door. "I believe I shall take a walk in the gardens," she announced. "Thomas, would you like to accompany your grandmother and feed the ducks?" She held out her hands to the baby, who went to her willingly, already babbling about ducks and water and bread. After they left, the silence in the library felt immense, charged with possibility. The Duke stepped closer until he was standing directly before me, so close I could feel the heat of him, see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. "Miss Ashford," he began, then stopped and shook his head. "Elena? May I call you Elena?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Elena," he continued, his voice low and intense, "I have made many mistakes in my life. I have hidden from grief, neglected my son, allowed fear to dictate my choices. But breaking that engagement is not one of them. I realized, with the dowager's rather forceful assistance, that I was about to commit the greatest mistake of all, sacrificing genuine happiness for the appearance of propriety. "The scandal will be enormous," I managed. "Your reputation, Thomas's prospects, everything we worried about before, will survive," he said firmly. "Yes, there will be talk. Yes, some doors will close to us. But the people who matter, the people whose opinions I actually value, will understand." The dowager has already begun writing letters to her influential friends, explaining the situation in terms that cast me as sensible rather than scandalous. My solicitor believes the damage can be managed, especially since Lady Harriet is cooperating to save her own reputation. He took my hands in his, and the touch sent warmth flooding through me. But even if none of that were true, even if breaking the engagement meant complete social ostracism, I would still do it. Because I cannot live the rest of my life regretting the choice I failed to make, watching you care for my son while married to another woman, pretending that what I feel for you does not exist. "What exactly do you feel for me?" I asked, needing to hear him say it clearly, without ambiguity. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your intelligence, your compassion, your courage in the face of cruelty. I love the way you care for Thomas as if he were your own, the way you challenged me to be a better father, a better man. I love your laugh, your thoughts, the way you argue with me about philosophy and never let me win simply because of my rank. I love everything about you, Elena, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I love you too," I whispered. "I have tried not to, tried to maintain proper distance, but I cannot help it. You have become everything to me, you and Thomas both." "Then marry me," he said, and my heart stuttered. Not because society expects it, or because Thomas needs a mother, though both those things are true. Marry me because I love you and you love me, and life is too short to waste on anything less than that. "I am a governess," I said, though my objections felt weak even to my own ears. "You are a duke. The disparity in our stations would be fodder for gossip for years. I was a governess," he corrected gently. Now you are the woman I love, the woman I choose to spend my life with. As for gossip, let them talk. I have endured worse, and I suspect you have as well. We will face it together. What about Thomas? His future as a duke will be secured by love and stability, not by the bloodline of his stepmother. The Duke pulled me closer. Elena, I am not asking you to be a duchess for show. I am asking you to be my wife, Thomas's mother, my partner in building a life that matters. Everything else is secondary. I looked into his eyes and saw absolute certainty there, no doubt, no hesitation. He had made his choice and was at peace with it. The question was whether I had the courage to make the same choice, to step into a role I had never imagined for myself, to claim the happiness that was being offered despite all the reasons I should refuse. Yes, I said finally, and the word felt like freedom. Yes, I will marry you. He pulled me into his arms then, holding me close, and I felt the tension drain from his body, as if he had been holding his breath waiting for my answer. We stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the rightness of it, the way we fit together, as if we had been made for this. When he finally drew back, there were tears on his cheeks matching my own. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Thank you for taking this risk with me, for believing we can make this work." "We will make it work," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We have already weathered so much. We can weather this too." The scandal, when it broke, was indeed enormous. The newspapers had a field day with the story, printing breathless accounts of the Duke's broken engagement and subsequent courtship of his son's governess. We were called everything from romantic heroes to social pariahs, depending on which paper one read. Invitations dried up from some quarters, while increasing from others, society dividing itself into those who found our story charming and those who found it appalling. But the Dowager proved herself a formidable ally. She hosted a dinner party 3 weeks after the engagement was broken, inviting the most influential members of society and seating me at her right hand as if I were already family. She made it clear through word and gesture that anyone who wished to insult me would have to answer to her, and her approval carried enough weight to silence many who might have been openly critical. The Duke handled the rest with quiet dignity. He did not hide our relationship or apologize for it. When questioned, he stated simply that he was marrying the woman he loved, that Thomas was thriving under her care, and that anyone who found that objectionable was welcome to keep their distance. His directness disarmed many critics, and his obvious happiness silenced others. We were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at Thornfield's chapel. The Dowager attended, along with a handful of the Duke's closest friends and relations. There was no grand society wedding, no elaborate reception, just a quiet exchange of vows before God and the people who mattered most to us, with Thomas toddling up the aisle, scattering flower petals, and making everyone laugh. I wore a simple gown of cream silk, with flowers from Thornfield's gardens in my hair. The Duke wore a formal morning dress, but his expression as I walked toward him was anything but formal. He looked at me as if I were something precious and miraculous, and when we spoke our vows, his voice shook with emotion. "I, Alexander, take you, Elena, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. I, Elena, take you, Alexander, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part." When he kissed me, I felt the rightness of it settle into my bones, the certainty that this was where I was meant to be, who I was meant to be with. The small congregation applauded, and Thomas, held by the Dowager, clapped his hands in imitation, shouting Papa and Mama with equal enthusiasm. The weeks that followed were an adjustment, learning to be not just a governess, but a wife, a duchess, a mother in truth as well as practice. The servants who had known me as Miss Ashford had to learn to call me Your Grace, though I encouraged them to use my given name in private. The estate business required my attention in ways I had not anticipated. Tenant concerns and household accounts and social obligations that came with my new position. But through it all, Alexander was beside me, teaching me what I needed to know, supporting my decisions, making it clear to everyone that I was not merely his wife, but his partner in all things. He was patient with my mistakes, amused by my unfamiliarity with aristocratic customs, proud of my efforts to learn and grow into the role. Thomas, for his part, seemed utterly unconcerned with titles and scandals. He called me Mama and Alexander Papa with equal affection, and if he noticed that I now sat at the head of the table rather than in the background, he gave no sign of it. His world had expanded to include the security of two parents who loved him and each other, and that was all that mattered to him. Society gradually accepted our marriage, helped by the Dowager's continued championing and by the simple fact that we were obviously happy. Those who had predicted disaster were disappointed when scandal gave way to stability, when the Duke's household became known not for impropriety, but for warmth and genuine affection. Slowly, invitations began arriving again, and when we chose to accept them, we were received with courtesy, if not universal warmth. There were still those who whispered, of course. At balls and dinner parties, I would catch sidelong glances, hear conversations fall silent as I approached. The women who had once been my peers as governesses now had to curtsy to me, and some did so with poorly concealed resentment. The aristocratic women who should have been my peers treated me with careful courtesy that did not quite hide their conviction that I did not truly belong among them. But I learned not to care. I had Alexander's love, Thomas's devotion, and the knowledge that I had earned my place through genuine service and sacrifice rather than accident of birth. When doubt crept in during those first months, when I felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of my position, Alexander would take my hand and remind me of the night at the ball, of how I had stood alone against the cruelty of society and survived. "You are the strongest person I know," he would say. "If you can endure that, you can endure anything." 1 year after our wedding, we hosted a ball at Thornfield, our first major social event as a married couple. I was terrified in the weeks leading up to it, convinced that something would go wrong, that I would make some terrible mistake that would embarrass Alexander and prove all the critics right. But the night came and went without disaster. The house was beautiful, filled with candlelight and music and elegantly dressed guests. I moved through the crowds in a gown of deep blue silk, Alexander at my side, introducing me to people I had never met, supporting me through conversations that would have been intimidating a year earlier. And when the dancing began, he led me onto the floor for the first waltz, holding me close as we moved through the familiar patterns. "Do you remember the last ball we attended together?" he asked quietly as we turned. "I remember wanting to disappear through the floor," I said. "I remember thinking my life was over." "And now?" "Now," I said, looking up at him with all the love I felt shining in my eyes. "Now I am exactly where I am meant to be." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that still made my heart race. "As am I," he said. "As am I." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the house had settled into quiet, I went up to the nursery to check on Thomas before retiring. He was 3 years old now, growing from a baby into a boy, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's delicate features. He slept peacefully in his bed, one arm curled around a stuffed horse, his face soft with dreams. I stood watching him for a long moment, remembering the frightened, lonely governess I had been when I first came to care for this child. I had thought then that my life would be one of service and solitude, that love and family were luxuries reserved for women born to different circumstances. I had been so certain that my role was to give everything and ask for nothing in return. How wrong I had been. How gloriously, wonderfully wrong. Strong arms encircled me from behind, and I leaned back into Alexander's embrace, feeling safe and cherished and home. "He is beautiful," Alexander whispered against my hair, "just like his mother." I smiled at the designation, still sometimes surprised by it, still sometimes overcome by the gift of claiming this title. "Both his mothers," I corrected gently. "Catherine gave him life. I simply helped him grow. You gave him more than that. You gave him love when his father was too broken to provide it. You gave him stability when his world was nothing but secrets and shadows. And you gave me," he turned me in his arms to face him, "you gave me a reason to stop hiding from life." I reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved lines of it. "We gave each other that gift," I said. "Neither of us could have done this alone." "No," he agreed. "We could not. But together," he kissed me softly, "together we have built something worth having." We stood like that in the nursery doorway, holding each other while our sons slept peacefully nearby, and I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain and scandal, the fear and uncertainty, the courage it had taken to choose love over convention, happiness over duty. Society had tried to destroy me that night at the ball, had tried to use my vulnerability as entertainment, my silence as proof of guilt. They had mocked the governess, judged her without mercy, taken pleasure in her public humiliation. But they had not counted on the Duke seeing what they could not, on him valuing what they dismissed, on him choosing to stand with me rather than against me. And in doing so, he had saved us both. The morning after the ball, I woke early and went to the window of our bedroom, looking out over the Thornfield grounds in the pale dawn light. From here, I could see the cottage where I had lived for that first year, the gardens where Thomas took his first steps, the path that led to the village where I had once walked alone, bearing the weight of secrets not my own. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone I had been in another life. I had been Miss Ashford then, a governess with no prospects, no family, no security beyond the whim of her employer. I had expected nothing from life except the opportunity to serve, to be useful, to perhaps earn enough to retire in modest comfort in my old age. Now I was the Duchess of Thornfield, wife to a man I loved beyond measure, mother to a child who filled my days with joy. I had position, security, respect earned through trial and proven through service. I had a family, a home, a future that stretched before me bright with possibility. But more than all of that, I had learned something essential about myself. I had learned that I was stronger than I knew, braver than I believed, worthy of love not because of my position or accomplishments, but simply because I existed. The women at that ball had tried to teach me that I was nothing, that I could be discarded without consequence, that my pain was entertainment for those with power. But their cruelty had instead taught me the opposite. It had shown me that I could endure, that I could stand firm in the face of judgment, that my worth was not determined by their approval or disapproval. And it had led me here, to this morning, to this life, to this incredible gift of love and family that I had never dared imagine for myself. Alexander stirred behind me, waking. I felt his arms come around me, pulling me back against his chest, his chin resting on my shoulder as we looked out together at the awakening day. "What are you thinking about?" he asked sleepily. "Everything," I said. "How far we have come. How different everything is from what I expected. Are you happy?" I turned in his arms to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his question, the fear that perhaps I regretted the path we had chosen. I cupped his face in my hands and kissed him with all the love and certainty I possessed. "I am happier than I ever knew it was possible to be," I said firmly. "Every difficulty, every scandal, every moment of doubt has been worth it to arrive at this place. With you, with Thomas, with this life we have built together." Relief and joy flooded his expression. "I love you, Elena," he said. "I will never stop being grateful that you took a chance on us, that you believed we could overcome the obstacles." "I believed in you," I corrected. "I believed that a man who could learn to love his son despite his grief, who could stand up to society's judgment to protect someone with no power, who could choose happiness over duty, was worth taking a risk for. We stood like that as the sun rose over Thornfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, warming the stone and gardens, bringing light to the shadows. Somewhere in the house, I heard Thomas waking, heard his cheerful morning babble, heard the servants beginning their daily routines. Life was stirring, continuing, moving forward into whatever the future held, and I was ready for it. Ready to face whatever challenges came, to weather whatever storms might brew, to build this family and this life with the man I loved. The governess who had been mocked at the ball was gone, transformed through love and adversity into someone stronger, more certain, more holy herself. They had mocked the governess at the ball until the Duke claimed the child they thought was hers alone. But in claiming his son, he had also claimed me, had chosen to see worth where society saw only scandal, to find love where convention dictated only duty. And in doing so, he had given me back not just my dignity, but my life, had shown me that I was deserving of happiness, of family, of love that asked nothing except that I be myself. That night at the ball had been meant to destroy me. Instead, it had been the beginning of everything, the moment when my true life started, when I stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The women who had whispered and judged, who had taken such pleasure in my humiliation, had unknowingly set in motion the very thing they feared, had pushed the Duke toward a choice that changed everything. I should have been grateful to them, I supposed, for their cruelty had inadvertently brought me here. But I was not grateful. I was simply aware that their power over me had ended that night when Alexander stepped forward and claimed his son, when he spoke truth into their lies, when he chose courage over cowardice. They had tried to write my story, to cast me as the fallen woman, the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when one stepped beyond one's station. But they had not counted on Alexander rewriting the narrative, on him transforming their scandal into his truth, their mockery into his declaration of love. And now the story belonged to us, to write as we chose, to live as we desired, to shape into something beautiful despite its difficult beginning. The governess they had mocked was now a duchess, beloved wife, and devoted mother. The hidden child was now an acknowledged heir, growing strong and happy in a household built on love rather than secrets. And the Duke, who had hidden from life, was now fully engaged in it, finding joy in the simple act of being present for the people he loved. This was our triumph, our victory over those who had tried to break us. Not revenge or vindication or public acclaim, but simply this: the quiet happiness of a family building a life together, the deep satisfaction of love freely given and generously returned, the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. As Thomas ran into the room, his face bright with morning enthusiasm, climbing into our bed and demanding stories and breakfast and attention, I gathered him close and looked at Alexander over his dark curls. My husband smiled at me, that smile that was reserved only for private moments, only for the family we had created against all odds. "Tell me a story, Mama," Thomas demanded. "Tell me about the princess who became a queen." "That is your mother's story," Alexander said, his voice warm with pride. "Perhaps she should tell it." I settled Thomas more comfortably, feeling the weight and warmth of him, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood and morning. "Once upon a time," I began, "there was a woman who thought she had no power, who believed her life would be small and quiet and lived in service to others. But she was wrong, because she had a power greater than any title or fortune. She had love and courage and the strength to stand firm when others tried to break her." "What happened to her?" Thomas asked, though he had heard variations of this story many times. "She found a family," I said simply. "She found a home. And she learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin in the darkest moments, that sometimes the best stories start with pain and end with joy, and that love, when it is real and true and brave, can transform everything." Thomas nodded sagely, satisfied with this answer. "I love you, Mama," he said. "I love you, Papa." "We love you too, sweetheart," Alexander said, and his hand found mine across Thomas's small body, our fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, revealing the beauty of Thornfield in full daylight. In the village, people were beginning their daily tasks, and in London, society was already preparing for the next scandal, the next entertainment, moving on from our story to whatever drama came next. But here, in this room, in this moment, we were untouchable. We were safe in the fortress of our love, protected by the truth we had spoken into existence, sustained by the family we had chosen to be. They had mocked the governess at the ball, but the governess was gone, transformed into something they had not anticipated and could not diminish. I was Elena, Duchess of Thornfield, wife and mother and survivor. And this was my happy ending, earned through pain and courage, tested by scandal and society, and proven true by the love of the man beside me and the child in my arms. The story that had begun with humiliation and secrets had become one of redemption and joy. And as we sat together in the morning light, I understood that this was not an ending at all, but a beginning, the start of a life I would spend building with the people I loved most in the world. They had tried to write my story in shame, but I had rewritten it in love. And that made all the difference.